On this episode of B2B Revenue Leaders, I'm joined by Tyler Lessard. Tyler is the VP of Marketing and Chief Video Strategist at Vidyard and the Chief Feeder over at SalesFeed. We discuss why you're probably doing your content marketing all wrong, the benefits of launching a separate media brand, and how to use humor in your video content. Hey, Tyler, welcome to the show.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one for sure. And I'm going to actually dive right into, your marketing hot take that you sent us right off the bat to get into the episode. So when I asked that, you said you're probably doing content marketing all wrong. I didn't take it personal. I'm probably doing stuff wrong too, but let's expand on that. Where are you going with that one?
Well, content marketing, I think, is even more important today than it has been over the last, 10, 15 years when it's come rising to the forefront of marketing. And that's largely because audiences today continue to more and more prefer self-serving. They prefer on-demand content over, live conversations. There are more stakeholders than ever in deals that need to consume content on their own time. But they're also, even before that point, building relationships with brands through their online content. And, that's really, really important these days, especially as it's hard to differentiate from all the noise. Everybody is putting everything out on digital. And so I really believe that the role of content marketing has and will continue to evolve to be less about, inbound and SEO. Those are still important, but more about how we build relationships with audiences before, during, and after they've been customers of ours. And the importance of thinking about, how do I do that? How do I use content to build relationships with audiences, to be top of mind with them, to create sort of consistent conversations, as opposed to just, hey, when they happen to be searching for something, I'll be here to make sure I can answer it. And I think that's a really big important thing for us as we go ahead in this next phase of digital only marketing and content strategies.
For sure. I think the kind of affinity is part of it there, right? There's brands you trust, even though you've never been a customer. And, I have a few of those as well. I've never used Winter. I will recommend them to marketers when they talk about messaging because they put out good content. And I'm they know what they're talking about. They've done their job. So if I'm ever in market, I'll go there. On the kind of types of content and format, some B2B companies doing great there. Some maybe stuck 10 years ago a little bit. Where do you think content is going and what should people be focusing on there?
Well, there's a few different dimensions to, the answer to that question. When I think through where is content today? Where's it been? Where's it going? One way to look at it is from a format and channels perspective. It's a much more diverse world now and will continue to be going forward than it has been traditionally for B2B marketers. And what I mean by that is a lot of our content marketing strategy traditionally have been anchored in written content, in blog posts, in ebooks and guides and white papers and so on, static written content that, again, was primarily designed for inbound marketing to attract people who are searching for different topics, or again, to support, outbound campaigns with a download this ebook so I can capture your information and generate a lead. And again, while those are still important, I think the bigger opportunity is this diversification of content. More and more, our audiences are leaning towards things like podcasts, things like video content, channels like not only our websites, but of course, social media channels continue to be more and more influential in how we reach customers. Things like newsletters and ultimately YouTube channels. Even TikTok is becoming and will be an important channel for B2B brands to reach their audiences. Why? Because that's where people are spending time, right? And we need to adapt to that, and we need to adapt quickly. And when you think about things like YouTube and even TikTok being new channels to reach audiences, that doesn't just have an impact on, again, channels we target, but it has an impact on our content strategy, because you need to be creating content specifically for those channels to really tap into them. It impacts our social media strategy. It even impacts our brand personalities, right? How do we represent ourselves on channels like TikTok and YouTube, which again are going to be a little bit different from what we're used to traditionally on our own websites. So I think it's a really interesting kind of time where we need to think more broadly about the role of content. We need to think more broadly about the channels at our disposal. And we need to think about how does it become a representation of our brand personality, not just helping people learn about who we are, But again, building relationships with them in different ways by, having different types of conversations, by engaging them in maybe not only learning, but maybe also things like laughing, right? Like these are becoming more and more important in how we build these digital relationships.
Yeah. And I think, like you mentioned, different channels, right? So YouTube, a little longer form. TikTok, you go over a minute, no one's going to watch it. So how are you attacking that, kind of micro content approach? Are you doing a bigger piece and chopping it up, or native content for each platform is kind of the way to go?
Yeah, it's really interesting right now to look at these channels and how B2B brands are working with them. The way that I think about it is you have to be disciplined in what your strategy is for these different channels, right? You can't necessarily be the best on all of the different channels. And if you can, all the power to you. But I think about it as, for these different channels, do you have like a really active strategy or more of a passive strategy for them? And if you have a more passive strategy, then typically what you're going to do is say, great, that channel has some importance. Like take YouTube as an example. We might say, okay, I'm not yet bought in that YouTube is going to be a place for me to reach a bunch of new audiences. But it's important that I have a YouTube channel. I should have a presence there. People are going to find me there. My customers are going to follow me there. So I'm going to have more of a passive content strategy where I'm going to leverage content we're already creating, video content we're already building, put it on our YouTube channel so that our audience can find it. They might be thought leadership content, might be how-tos, things like that. There may be some product specific content. There may be some customer stories and so on. There may be a, video podcast that we're doing, and we want to make sure that that's there as well. So to me, that's kind of a passive strategy. The active strategy is when you are actively investing in building content for the channel. And you're saying, you know what, we want to be very strategic on YouTube because we think there's an opportunity there to build an audience. And so we are going to be specifically creating content for that YouTube channel. That content may not even live anywhere else. It may be built specifically for that audience, that format, and what people are looking for there. Same thing with TikTok, right? TikTok is actually the worst place to repurpose other content you're creating. TikTok is, and Instagram Reels are probably the most important channels to be thinking about creating specifically for those. And so like in our world, as Vidyard, we take I'd say we're not actually doing much on TikTok as core Vidyard. On channels like YouTube and LinkedIn, we have a somewhere between passive and active strategy. But in parallel, as you know, but to share with our listeners, we launched a media brand extension to Vidyard recently called Sales Feed. And Sales Feed was meant to be basically a new type of content and community for sales professionals that people were targeting. And we launched a TikTok channel, a YouTube channel, and other dedicated properties around Sales Feed, an audience-first platform. And there we've invested in a hyper-active strategy for those channels. Our Sales Feed YouTube channel, our Sales Feed TikTok channel, Instagram, LinkedIn, we're creating content for each of those channels every day. And it's very different from how we approach the content, when we build it through other lenses. So it's been interesting experience to really dive in there and say, we're going to make active content for TikTok, for Reels, for YouTube, as well as for our website and other places, and to sort of start to figure that out and see what it takes.
Yeah, so I definitely want to go into that because they all have their own nuance, right? Like YouTube, very different from TikTok, and finding a creator who can do everything. Like, yeah, there's probably unicorns out there who can do that, but it's few and far between, right? So what do you think the role of the creator is? Like, do you think more companies are going to be hiring a part-time TikTok specialist to just own their channel? Like, what do you think the play there is going to be in the next year or so?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because you're absolutely right that being a, TikTok content creator can very much take a different skill set and different experience than creating content for your website or even for a YouTube channel and so on. And so you really do have to be disciplined as a marketing team and as a business to think about, where do we want to place our bets? And, what kind of skill set or talent do we need to really, tap into those? And it can very much be a mistake to say, we think that there's an opportunity on TikTok because, there's a lot of people out there in our demographic, but most other brands are doing it well. Maybe you see a greenfield opportunity, or we're going to invest in a YouTube strategy, or even just a thought leadership, content strategy. And the people to drive the different parts of that may end up being different, right? It's a mistake to say, hey, I've got a content marketing team or a content marketer. They can do these things as well. One of the things that we did that has been very successful for us as part of our sales feed initiative, I hired an individual who came from that community. So he was actually a sales rep himself. So he understood that community. And I said, you know what? I want this content strategy to be 100% audience first, right? I don't want us as marketers trying to say, hey, here's what we want to tell you. And so I hired a person who came from the world of sales. Now, this individual also had developed successful TikTok channels. He had built his own personal sales TikTok account to more than 40,000 followers. And so I knew that he had that skill set and that creator edge to him. And I brought him into the team, and he now runs our TikTok channel as well as content for our Instagram Reels, as well as content for our LinkedIn channel. And it has been incredibly successful because he came in with an understanding of how to build for those channels and how to have that creator mindset. And he's not the guy I tap when, we want to make a 3-minute, or 5-minute customer testimonial video, right? That's a different sort of skill set. And so again, there's no right or wrong answer right now, but I think that companies need to be more thoughtful and saying, well, just a social media manager and a video producer does not necessarily equal success on TikTok or YouTube or other channels like that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the key point there for me, at least, is the audience first approach. Like you said, it's easy to get muddled as a marketer or, even an executive at a company saying, how do we tie this back? Like, we're not plugging our product. But if you did that, you'd ruin it. People would not, if it was constantly plugging Vidyard, people would not tune in. So for people who are into this idea, they think, we need to create better media for our audience. How should they position and kind of sell that to leadership?
It's an interesting one because, most of our approaches to content and of course, marketing in the past has very much been, what are the messages we want to deliver? Who are the people we want to, service or find and bring to us? And then how do we convert them? And of course, that's still a fundamental of a lot of what we're going to do as marketers. But if you think about, wanting to create this big online community of people who are engaging with your brand on a consistent basis, if you're focusing just on the topics you care about as a business, right? Like take Vidyard, for example, when for salespeople, we have a video messaging tool. And so traditionally, we always talk about video, right? So how to be successful with video as a salesperson and best practices and tips and ideas around selling with video. And we reach a good number of people with that. But there's only a subset of the sales community, for example, that care about that as a topic right now. And even when they do, they'll engage with us for a small period of time, right? It'll be like, oh, I heard about using video. I search for it. I find Vidyard. I read some of their content. I sign up for free. And now I start using it and they go away, right? They don't continue to engage with us because they've started to figure out video and they're like, okay, thanks for the tips, Vidyard. I'm out of here. But when you think about that and the way we presented it to our executive team is, making it very clear that this is limiting our opportunity to reach people because we're relying on this broader awareness of them even looking for a video tool in the first place. Once they do, we're the best resource. We're confident. But what about the other 90% of salespeople out there who haven't even heard of this before or will never search video messaging for sales, right? How do we reach those people and then slowly acclimatize them to some of the things we care about because we're very passionate about video and sales. And so the idea was, in this case, and how we presented it was launching this media brand extension where we're going to talk about what we think salespeople care the most about. And they're going to come back every week to read our newsletter, to consume our content because we're providing the best, most engaging, and also most entertaining content for them as sales pros. And as they do, well, guess what? Every once in a while, we are going to talk about using video, right? And we'll, of course, recommend Vidyard as the best tool to do that. So now we see people coming in from the community with like, oh my gosh, you just made the best video I've ever seen on cold calling, or the most entertaining video I've ever seen on objection handling. And so they come back for the next piece and the next piece. But that next one then is, hey, have you thought about selling with video? Here's what it's all about. Here are some tips and best practices. And so by being able to sort of have that model and talk even logically through it with the executive team, and say, would this be of value if we could build a broader community of people who care about broader topics? But then slowly, as part of this, we'll expose them to the things we care about because we think they should know about them. And you can start to like think about those conversion paths. That's when you can start to get buy-in. And the executive team can say, oh, okay, I see this isn't just about having fun and talking to the community. There's a thread of how we're going to convert these people longer term because we still need to build a business. We still need to generate revenue. So thinking about it through that lens, and that's kind of what I've learned about the connection between building a community and then bringing them into your brand and that bigger opportunity that we all have with it.
Yeah, and I think the community part is key there. And something I've noticed with SalesFeed is you are working with other sales leaders and sales experts who have their following, right? Which you get some of their following, they get some of yours. You build a great connection with someone who could be a customer, could refer people. So is that part of the thought process as well? Is if you're doing something on cold calling, get Jason Bay or someone who focuses on cold calling as an expert and build that connection there.
Yeah, very much so. When you take this kind of content, social and community strategy where you say, we're going to focus 100% on what the audience cares about. What are the topics they're most interested in? It starts to give you more latitude in terms of what are the things we're going to talk about? What are the things we're going to invest in? Which also inevitably gives you a broader community of other thought leaders, influencers, practitioners who you can bring into that conversation and who you can partner with for kind of great co-marketing content, if you will, or sort of influencer marketing. Again, to sort of give you a very tangible example, as Vidyard, when we talk about, using video for selling, there's a handful of sales experts who also talk about video, and we'll do things with them and then they'll share to their communities. Hey, here's some of my best tips and best practices. By the way, we think you should use Vidyard because it's the best product. Great. Check the boxes. But now to your point, when we go out and talk about cold calling, we talk about email prospecting, we talk about negotiation, we talk about all these other topics salespeople care about. All of a sudden, there's dozens more thought leaders in the community that we can tap and partner with. And now we can bring them into the conversation. We can create joint content with them. They can share with their communities. And this sort of, I think of it as like the surface area of what we're building grows exponentially. And again, we're not now limited to connecting with salespeople who only care about using video. We can start to find people who are, who they care about negotiation tips, or they care about how to run a great discovery call. And by the way, if they care about those things, eventually they're also going to care about using video in their sales process. So again, we've got that connected tissue. I think that's been a really interesting part of the strategy. And it was intentional early on of saying, let's partner with folks from across the community to bring great content. And one of the neat things that I've, in hindsight, I've learned is that it was a big risk to do it as a media brand extension. So SalesFeed, as opposed to Vidyard. It's still a monthly debate internally, like, should we keep building two brands or not? But one of the really interesting things I found is when we approach a thought leader or an influencer and we say, hey, would you like to participate in some joint content with SalesFeed, right? We're doing this great new video on this topic. I don't think I've ever had anybody say no. And, the reality is when we approach them as Vidyard, right, as a tech vendor brand, often it will be, oh, well, either, maybe not, or sure, here's my fees, right? Like, pay me $3,000 and I'll do this because obviously this is a marketing ploy. SalesFeed has given us this kind of like content platform to be really community first, almost like vendor agnostic. And it kind of allows you to do things much more organically, which has been really interesting. So I can't tell you whether or not launching a separate brand from your own core one is the right thing to do. I'll let you know in a couple of years when I write the book and see where we got.
There we go. Yeah. When you're done that, send a copy my way.
Yes,
so I'm really curious on this topic. And I think, you're basically focusing on helping salespeople be better salespeople rather than niching down just everything is about video, which, if you look back 5 years ago, maybe the argument would have been opposite. People would say, you're a video company, niche down, just talk about that, hammer that message home. But eventually you just run out of things to say that are interesting and your community is just so small, right? So it is taking that broader bucket approach here.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think it's some of these ideas, I certainly think it does depend on, your organization, the market you're in, the opportunities you see, even the stage that you're at. To your point, it may be a difficult pill to swallow if you're a small company with, a 3-person marketing team, for example, to say, hey, we're going to become thought leaders and content creators for a whole audience. But I think it's a very, natural evolution. And I think what's also really interesting is when you force yourself and you force your marketing team and your content team to really, truly look through the lens of your audience, pushes them to also become more empathetic to that community, and everything they produce ends up better. Right. So it's almost like pulls them out of their comfort zone and saying, well, wait a minute, we're going to talk about things that aren't about video. We don't know about those things. And then we say, well, we've got to learn, right? Like immerse yourself in the community, listen to podcasts, read articles. We all need to become experts in this community as best we can. And so, again, really pushing yourself to be a little bit broader in your content than just what you focus on, I think is a lot of great, beneficial byproducts to it as well. And something that I find a lot of companies don't really think about doing. And it scares them to think, well, I've got only so many resources. We really got to focus in here. But if you do it in a way that, is thoughtful, then can be a huge win. But you always want to have that mental note of, okay, how does this connect to our core capabilities? Because at the end of the day, we do still need to make sure that, of course, we're feeding the funnel and hitting our core metrics.
Yeah. And I think like just for me, for example, from running this podcast, we're only a few episodes in, but it's kind of market research. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking to people who are somewhat a buyer or potential buyer down the road. And, same with you, with a lot of the sales experts you talk to. So I'm sure it helps you understand their needs because, you have a marketing background, right? You don't have a full on sales background, but I bet you've learned a ton about sales and really understand that buyer through the media component. So there's kind of that learning, like for me hosting the podcast, for example, every episode I learn 3 things and I go back to my team and I'm like, hey, let's try this. This is a good idea. So I think there's that component, which is huge for people creating content.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that happens, hopefully that happens generally in your own content pursuits. But I find that, things like when making video content, when making, podcast audio content, also things that are more like interview based, you're right. They naturally have that byproduct of exposing you to more ideas, more interesting thought leadership, as opposed to when you're solely focused on, say, writing blog articles. You'll go out and do your research and you'll certainly learn. But then when you're coming back, you're writing it yourself, you're putting yourself in a little bit of a box. Whereas again, I think some of these other ideas, you can still do written content, of course, based on interviewing others. But I do find that certainly this greater investment in multimedia has had this nice side benefit of saying, hey, this is almost pushing us to have more real conversations with other people, to like dig into stories, to really understand the whys behind things. And, that again, I think is not only helping the content itself, but is also, making us stronger marketers and more empathetic to our audience, which is great.
Yeah, I think there's the learning component. And the thing I like that you're doing is you're not afraid of actually using humor and making it entertaining, which some people in B2B, it's like, oh no, you can't be funny. You can't joke about this. We've got to be serious all the time. So obviously that was an intentional play just with how you built this out. But what was the thought behind that to, actually focus on entertainment and humor and making it enjoyable?
Yeah. So this has been a really interesting part of specifically our sales feed media brand that we built out as part of Vidyard. And when we did our initial research, we looked at our, target audience community, in this case, salespeople, sales professionals. And, we spent a little bit of time doing some sort of focus groups and interviewing a number of different people to get a sense for what is the type of content they actually like to engage with today, right? Like if they had a period of time, how would they spend that engaging with content? Or social media channels and so on. And we learned in that exercise, specifically for our target audience, salespeople, they had a greater affinity for short form content than long form. They had a greater affinity for video, audio, and visual content as opposed to written content. I'm not trying to paint a stereotype of salespeople that they don't like to read. But so many of them, you're like, hey, which blogs do you read? And they're like, blogs? Are you kidding me? I can't get through the first paragraph. but you talk to a sales leader, a VP of sales, and they're like, yep, I read this. And and so it's a very different sort of mentality. But we also found it was really interesting as we were asking them, like, which social media channels do you follow? Consistently, sales humor related channels were referenced as something that they follow. And they were pretty much just like sales meme channels, if you will. And as we dug into it, we realized, wow, yeah, like they have massive followings, super high engagement. And, we sort of developed that appreciation of, okay, so for salespeople, it's pretty clear here. They got a super stressful job. And, they like, the humor is a great way to, laugh a little bit, blow off a little bit of steam, create some feeling of belonging and camaraderie. And I think that's true of really any ecosystem. Like we all love to laugh as humans. And, but we found it, particularly important in this audience. And so, we decided, hey, if we're going to be, salespeople first, we know they want to learn through short form, primarily video content. And we know they love to laugh. And so we landed on this really simple, right? Like we're here to help you learn and laugh and live a better life in sales. And what was interesting in our research is we found that those doing humor in the world of sales were pretty much just doing that, right? So it was either a sales humor channel or a learning channel. And the two weren't really crossing over. And so we saw this opportunity kind of staring back at us. We're like, wow, if we can build out a brand that's associated with both, right? Like come to learn and stay to laugh, or come for the laughs and then stay to learn. It seems so obvious now. And so we invested in that and we said, okay, let's make sure we've got the right people, the right approach, the right skills, and to do both learning and laughing. The hard thing though, Dustin, about laugh is you said like a lot of brands will say, well, we can't do humor. I think some of them are that. Some of them rightfully appreciate that humor is very hard, very hard to do well, especially in a business context. And it's very easy to mess up. And the risk of doing humor poorly can be a little bit bigger, right? If you screw something up, you offend people. It's risky. It's tough. And so if you're going to do that and you're going to lean into humor, again, you got to make sure you've got the right people, like folks that understand sort of, even the fundamentals of humor, people with backgrounds in comedy who can really appreciate how to tap into that. Because again, it's not necessarily the same people who you have today who are going to do humor well just because you want to do humor.
So how do you balance that? Because I could see a lot of companies saying, yeah, we want to do this. We want to hire someone, and then just red taping it down to mediocrity. You know what I mean? Like an idea gets thrown out. No, we can't do that. And then it just becomes boring, really. So how do you balance that? Let's not offend a whole bunch of people versus give the person with a comedy background free rein.
Yeah, we have some, very simple and fairly obvious, guide rails in terms of, when we're doing things like memes or, again, TikToks or parodies, which we often do for the sales community. There are some very simple rules that we all agreed upon and that we follow, certain things that we don't bring into that humor. Obviously there's always kind of a checkbox against those of, certain, reasons we may offend people, things like politics and violence, suicide, things like that. We're just like, we don't, those are off. But beyond that, we do give a lot of rope and a lot of free rein. And that's where I find some of our best content comes from, to the creators in the team. And I'd be lying if I said there weren't a few times where like something's gone out and then I've seen it and I've been like, ooh, I don't know about that one. I'm like, yeah, all right, let's see what happens. Right. But we haven't had any instances where, there's been any material blowback or concern, but, again, the team will include, the odd swear word and things, which sometimes we get a comment of like, not appropriate, not here for that. And, but again, we've made a call that we're comfortable doing things like that to a certain degree, knowing that it may not be for everyone. I think we're okay alienating people, but not genuinely offending people. And I think that's kind of the balance that we strike. It's also been an interesting byproduct, once again, of having this sales feed media brand separate from Vidyard as a brand identity. because with sales feed, we built it around this learn and laugh. We're going to be a little bit edgier, a little bit more fun and creative and sort of more parody, if you will. And that gives us some room to play, because with our core Vidyard brand, right, we know our customers, our users, they're following us on social media. They have certain expectations. And if they suddenly start seeing, in our LinkedIn feed, memes with, things that are a little bit out there, it may do more harm than good. And so by being able to sort of separate the two, it gives us more leeway with our sales feed brand, and people come to expect it, right? And they know, hey, if it's not for you, that's fine. Move on and find another place. Yeah. But it allows us to be a little bit more risky with the humor that we do. And we've learned a lot from that. And then we apply some of the fundamentals back over to our Vidyard brand. Like, okay, this part of what we're doing works over here, but these things, keep them over on feed.
Yeah, I think that's a little tick in the box for, the separate media company side, right? There is that distinction there where your corporate brand, I hate saying corporate brand, but you know what I mean? It is a little bit more at risk there, right? So I want to wrap it up with one question, because you're, constantly creating video, creating content for sales feed and Vidyard. What are some, video trends or directions things are going for the next year that you're excited about trying out and playing with?
The best thing to happen to video and content, frankly, over the last couple of years has been this great kind of equalizing of the content, this rise of just transparent, authentic, shoot and share style content that's largely been driven by, video on social media. And also even just, with everything going remote over the last few years, in case you missed it, the fact that we're all on Zoom calls with our home offices behind us, our dogs barking. So there's been this kind of great equalizing happening where, no longer am I concerned about making a video where I'm just pull out my camera, do something, or I make a TikTok, with a trending sound that's a little bit ridiculous, but it's great. And so this has happened now, which is giving us a lot more liberty in terms of how we use video. And honestly, it's taken some of the pressure off of, production quality, if you will. So it's allowing us to use it in so many different ways now. Again, things like conversational content on social media channels, quick and punchy, how-tos, and again, conversations with experts. Even the fact that a lot of content now, we're just used to things like jump cuts, right? Like you and I, if you wanted to shrink this interview down into a 3-minute bite size, one sentence here, jump to another sentence, jump to another sentence. People actually love that kind of stuff now because they're like, great, you're respecting my time. So there's a lot more latitude now in terms of how we can use video. And that's my biggest suggestion to people these days is just take a bit of a fresh view on what video content means for how you communicate your messages. Do away with the old, it's drone footage and $20,000 with an agency. Sure, for your homepage video, have at it. But the majority of content you're creating on a daily basis, right? Real people, real talk, peer-to-peer, empathy for your audience, bring in others around you, get faces, thought leaders and customers, right? Use it to build this transparency layer and to create this personality for your brand. Such a huge opportunity right now.
Yeah. And I think you wrapped that up nicely too, because that pulls in the community side as well, right? Because you're having those authentic conversations, you're meeting people, actually having, real talk with them.
Yeah.
That's what builds community rather than, let me fly you out and we'll be in a studio and film this. And right. I'm not going to see you, but the crew will. So,
my favorite, just a final suggestion and a example for all of you to check out. On Sales Feed, we're doing all sorts of great stuff I'm super proud of. But if you check out the Sales Feed YouTube channel, youtube.com/salesfeedtube, you'll find all sorts of interesting stuff. But check out the series called Sales FAQs. And this is a series where Will Aiken on our team, who's our head evangelist, he goes around to, 8 to 10 different sales experts in our community. And he asks them all the same series of questions, right? So the first question he'll ask is what's your favorite cold call opener, right? And they'll give him something. And then the next one is what makes a great email subject line or whatever it is. And then what we do is we create one video for each question. So one of the sales FAQ is what's the best cold call opener? And then we cut together these 8 different answers from 8 different thought leaders in the community. And it's the simplest content to create, right? Like there's Zoom calls with each of them we record. You do some little simple editing afterwards. You do these fast cuts. But the value in the content is so high and people love it because they're these real people giving, raw, authentic answers. But we're also not trying to say there's one answer. We're like, these are different perspectives from 8 different people. Fast, quick hit. I think it's just it's really great content, but also so easy to create. So if there's one thing you go and check out Sales Feed that I suggest you copy, check out Sales FAQ. Do something like that for your own community. Figure out what your version is of it, but that content hits home every time.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It's kind of the modern version. If you remember, like 10 years ago, they would do blog roundups, right? Like, send me your sentence, Mr. Expert. It's like a more engaging version of that, which it worked back then, right? Yep. So it's just that evolution of content as it grows.
Love it.
Yeah. Cool. So thank you for joining me. I definitely have a few notes I'm going to try out there. You mentioned the YouTube channel. If they want to learn more about Sales Feed, Vidyard, where should our listeners go?
So first of all, of course, connect with me on LinkedIn, Tyler Lessard, Vidyard, you'll find me. And secondly, if you want to check out what we're doing with our Sales Feed Media brand, you can go to salesfeedmedia.com. That's our home. You can sign up for our newsletter there and get our weekly newsletter, which brings the best of our content to your inbox, nice and simple. So feel free to use that as some inspiration. You can also find our different social channels from there. So feel free to check that out to see what we're doing on TikTok, YouTube, and others. And then, of course, Vidyard. It's a great video hosting, video messaging tool. Feel free to check that out as well, vidyard.com. Small plug.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Tyler. I'll include all those links in the podcast description for everyone. But thanks again for joining me.
Thank you, Dustin.
My key takeaway is it's really strategically thinking about whether you want to use an active or a passive strategy for certain media channels. So to paraphrase Tyler here, passive content means leveraging content you're already creating and then distributing out and repurposing it for existing channels. An active strategy is creative native content specifically for a particular channel and really focus on building an audience within that channel. Again, thanks for joining me on this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, I'd love if you head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review, or click subscribe to follow along and get updated on future episodes. Until next time.